And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another disappointed episode of the Assembly Call. As today, the Indiana Hoosiers fall in East Lansing at the Breslin Center, 88-69 to the Michigan State Spartans. It was a tale of two halves. The Hoosiers entered halftime down 41-40, and while they hadn't played very well over the final 3 minutes of that first half, they had done enough well in the first half, specifically on the offensive glass and mostly protecting the ball, to make you feel like they had a chance to go compete for the full 40 minutes. But what happened in the second half was just pure domination the entire half for Michigan State. And really, when you look at the runs between each TV timeout, you see how Michigan State just steadily beat the Hoosiers into submission there in the second half. They opened up on a 9-5 run, then it was 9-4, then it was 10-6, then it was 10-7, and they closed out on a 9-7 run to win 88-69. It was just a game where they didn't give Indiana any breathing room in the second half. The Hoosiers couldn't make enough shots to stay in it. And frankly, Indiana didn't have an answer for Denzel Valentine. They barely had a guess. And we will talk about all of that on this episode of the Assembly Call. We are running a little light today. Andy and Will both had prior commitments, so it will be me and Ryan guiding you through this episode of the Assembly Call, breaking down this disappointing game. And we will open up here, as we always do, and I will start with a banner moment. And for today's banner moment, we have to go back to the first half because, again, there wasn't anything in that second half that suggested that Indiana is on its way to its next banner, which we are going to spend a lot of time talking about. And it's hard to remember that there were some good moments there in the first half. Indiana went on a 13-2 run in the first half at one point. I think they led. Actually, it was a 15-2 run. They led by 10 points, 33-23, on an OG Anunoby steal and dunk. And really, to me, what he showed offensively is my banner moment. That's kind of the biggest positive that I take from this. We've gotten used to the steal and dunk from OG, but what we're starting to see is a little bit more aggressiveness, a little bit more confidence from OG on the offensive end. Now, granted, in the second half, that resulted in a couple of possessions where he got rejected, was a little bit out of control, and so it didn't work out so well in the second half. But in the first half, it looked great. I will take you back to a move that OG made where he got the ball on the block, made a quick turn, and made just this little kind of 4-foot baby jump shot. And I got an immediate flashback to Calbert Cheaney because it was the type of move Calbert used to make where he'd get the ball on the block, turn quickly before the defender even had a chance to react, and before anybody knows what's happening, the ball's swishing through the net. And I kind of felt bad tweeting that because you know how much I revere Calbert Cheaney. I don't make any comparisons to Calbert Cheaney very often, but none other than Terry Hutchins retweeted that and said it was a good comparison, so I felt okay. Again, it's not to say that OG is Calbert Cheaney, but every now and then, just because of his body type and some of the movements that he makes, you get little flashes of it, and I got a flash there. And then what he did on the next possession was, that was like Will Sheehy against Iowa type stuff, the drive and dunk that OG had. So that little 4-point run there by OG Anunoby, and then, of course, the steal and dunk. Again, I think in games like this where there aren't many positives to take, especially from your upperclassmen outside of Max, I think you want to look for some positive to grasp onto. And to me, it's that OG, as a freshman, was able to go into the Breslin Center, a place that gobbles up even upperclassmen, and really, be as assertive and confident as we've seen him. And as I said, it got him into trouble some in the second half, but he certainly looked the part in the first half, played very well. And so, to me, that's the big positive that I take. I don't know that we'll have a whole lot of other positives for this game outside of Max's play, but we'll see how the show develops. But that, to me, was today's banner moment. And with that, I will go over to Ryan Phillips, who has a much easier job here for the rant because there's so many possible options that you could choose from. So, Ryan, the floor is yours.
I'm going to take a different tack here. And here's the thing, folks. Indiana did not play well today. That was a poor showing. I'm sure we'll get into that over the next 45 minutes or whatever. But that Michigan State team, when it plays like that, that's a national championship caliber team. I think that's pretty obvious. Now that Denzel Valentine is back healthy, it took him a few games to sort of get there. Their real one loss with him in the lineup and actually acclimated was an overtime loss to Purdue that a lot of people felt was kind of handed to Purdue by some really bad late calls. That is a team that I think, having watched today and watched the Big Ten all season, that's the best team in the Big Ten. When Denzel Valentine plays like that, with all the supporting pieces they have, and guys like Forbes and Tum Tum Naren's back now, and Matt Costello, I mean, that is a national championship caliber team, and they put together a national championship caliber performance today. Their defense in the second half was unbelievable. Indiana could not get clean looks. Indiana could not get clean driving lanes. Even, little things where guys would drive and get bumped, and even when they got fouled, they were sending a message that we're not going to let this be easy on you. Yogi would drive and get bumped, and there would be a foul call, but it's in the back of your mind that, well, I can't get to the hoop from here, so I've got to try and do something else. And just every little thing they did was so effective, and you got to give them credit. I mean, Indiana did not play well, as I said, but you have to give Michigan State credit. That was an unbelievable performance, and in the second half, they just ran Indiana out of the gym. There's a reason Andy and I picked Michigan State. Michigan State at home, coming off a loss, regardless of how well Indiana played. I mean, Indiana pretty much dominated the first half statistically and was down by 1 at the break. I mean, that's just the way it is going on the road there, especially in Big Ten play, especially with them coming off a loss. That's what happens when you play Michigan State in Lansing. There's a reason we've only won once there in more than a decade or something. I don't know what the statistic is. I think we've won once since 2003 or something.
Well, I'll give you this. Indiana, in the last 25 games since 1987, Indiana's 4-21. And all of those 4 victories were by Indiana teams that eventually won the Big Ten title.
Yeah.
So it's been tough. And the average margin of victory for Michigan State's been 10+.
Yeah, I mean, they're so tough at home. And I know they've lost some games at home this year, but this is right now the way they're playing. This is a different team. And this is a team that I would peg into the Final Four right now. And so Indiana lost. It was a tough game. They played like garbage. We'll break that down. But I think that off the top, we need to say that was also an unbelievable performance by Michigan State. And they look like a team that could win out right now.
Yeah. Are you saying a Tom Izzo team is gelling in February and March? Wouldn't that be a change?
Yeah. Shocking, right?
Shocking.
I mean, you got to remember that these guys, this team was not good last year. They were okay last year. A lot of these guys come back. They weren't good last year, and they went to the Final Four. I mean, this is just the thing that these guys, when they're playing right and when they're playing together, is as good as anybody. And this year, they're way better than they were last year. And so, yeah, it's just a team that right now, Indiana ran into a buzzsaw. Even if Indiana played its best game, I still think we lose that game by, 5. So coming out and not playing well in the second half and things like that, it just snowballed, and that's how you get that final margin. And Michigan State is that is a scary team right now.
They are, and you do. You have to tip your cap to Michigan State. Denzel Valentine was great. Matt Costello was outstanding. Bryn Forbes made some shots. Now, we'll talk about how Indiana allowed them to be much more comfortable than they should have been, and that led to that. But definitely a tip of the cap to Michigan State. They were by far the best team on the court today, and Indiana just didn't have enough fight there in the second half to make it a 40-minute game, as I said that they would. So I was dead wrong, and that's always disappointing. But let's start breaking down all the bad, because there was a lot of it here coming up on the Assembly Call. Do want to remind everybody, if you're watching live, if you are listening on the podcast, or if you're listening on the Sports Buzz in Louisville, make sure that you get on our email list. The web address is assemblycall.com/subscribe, or you can text Indiana, INDIANA, to 44144. That will get you on the email list. Our post-game emails, we don't publish those anywhere. We send those only to our subscribers. They are the main reason why over 1,650 IU fans just like you are on the email list, so don't miss that analysis. We send other emails too, but that's the big highlight. So again, go to assemblycall.com/subscribe or text Indiana to 44144. You'll get a reply text message back. Just reply with your email address, and you will be on the list. All right. Well, you are listening to the Assembly Call IU postgame show. I am Jared Morris here with Ryan Phillips. We are breaking down Indiana's 88-69 loss to Michigan State. And I don't know, I'm not sure whether to be encouraged by this or really discouraged by this, but the two keys that I really thought coming into this game were going to be Indiana's ability to get on the offensive glass and keep the turnovers down. Because when Indiana doesn't turn it over, they typically do a pretty good job of scoring well. And Indiana mostly did a good job of that today. The turnover percentage was only 16.2%, which is right in the range where Indiana usually is when they win. They only had 11 turnovers. No individual player had more than 2. And you kind of expected that because Michigan State entered this game as the 345th best team at turning people over. So they don't really turn people over a lot. And then I thought if Indiana got offensive rebounds, they would be in good shape. And the Hoosiers, against a Michigan State team that only allows offensive rebounds on 23.7% of opponent possessions coming in, Indiana got 34.8% of their missed shots as offensive rebounds with 16 of them. And when you put those two together, you typically expect a strong offensive performance from Indiana, and yet the Hoosiers only score 1.02 points per possession, in large part because Indiana just couldn't make shots. And, they're 11 for 30 from downtown, which is 36.7%, which isn't awful, but the 2-point field goal shooting, Indiana really struggled. Thomas Bryant, only 4 for 11. Robert Johnson, only 3 for 10. And actually 8 of those shots that he took were 3-pointers. OG Anunoby, for the first time, I think, had double-digit field goal attempts. He was only 4 for 10. We talked about the 2 shots that he had in the second half that got rejected. And Troy Williams, 0 for 5. And there's a lot of different places that we can go with this, Ryan, but let's talk about the offense because I thought it was really humming early over the first 10 to 12 minutes. And then it's like Michigan State just shut the door. And you talked a little bit about it, about how physical Michigan State played, how uncomfortable they made it on Indiana, which is exactly the opposite of what Indiana did to Michigan State, where Denzel Valentine was pretty much able to move wherever he wanted to. And we made a great player, an All-American type player, look like, an all-time great player, 30 points, 13 assists, 5 rebounds. I mean, looking at the offense, what do you think was the biggest issue for the offense, especially there in the second half, where it just seemed like Indiana could never get any rhythm?
Well, I think that a large part was the defense from Michigan State really stepped up. They pressed the perimeter, any driving lanes. They were closing them up quickly. There were no clean looks the entire second half. And there was maybe 1 or 2 guys got a clean look. Those threes, I think a lot of them came because it was late in the shot clock and they just weren't getting anything, and guys just decided to fire. But again, even those were contested. I mean, pretty much everything was contested. But I thought the big thing Michigan State did is that everything at the rim was contested. Everything, there were at least 1 guy, sometimes 2, rotating over to help. Thomas Bryant didn't get clean looks at the rim. Max Bielfeldt shot over guys and made, he did a nice job of doing that, but that's not ideal. You want to go in, you want to stick it off the glass, put it in, or you want to finish with a dunk. That was there in the first half. It was not in the second half. And I don't know if that's a combination of IU just not moving the ball as well on offense, but I know for sure that part of the equation was Michigan State really stepped up defensively and just made, an incredible effort to make sure everything was contested. They were covered off of screens and everything like that. They were closing out well. I mean, it was just an excellent performance by them on that end of the floor. And as a combination, Indiana fell into those traps of, becoming a 3-point shooting team that will just fire shots when they're contested. Yogi clearly was getting frustrated. He jacked a few that were just bad shots and they were off. And, I saw the statistic. He's 7 of like 20 something since Penn State. He's really not shooting the ball well right now and needs to get in the gym and work on that this week. But yeah, it was just, I think everybody started to get frustrated a little bit and they started forcing things, started driving into crowds, and then, not really sure what they were going to do because there were guys there and there's no openings. So what do? Okay, you kick it back out, drive in, kick it back out. But there's just nowhere to go with the ball that leads to an opening. And I just thought it was something, I think, with about 15 minutes left in the second half, Indiana was so frustrated and just never got out of it. And again, when you face a great defensive team, that happens.
Let's talk about Yogi a little bit, because I think when he shot poorly against Penn State, you kind of look at it and say, okay, it's Yogi. We trust him. He shoots poorly against Iowa. It's like, okay, it's Yogi. He's going to get it going. Even made a big shot late, made all of his free throws. But today, again, another poor shooting performance. He's 1 of 6 from downtown, 3 of 10 overall from the field. And he's actually shot pretty well against Michigan State. He has never been a guy who's been able to get other people involved. He only averaged 3 assists per game in his last 4 against Michigan State. So they typically make it very hard on him to get other guys involved. Today, he did have 7 assists. 6 of them came in the first half, but he wasn't able to get going. And I really felt like his inability to make some shots kind of hurt everybody's confidence on offense. I don't know how long this team can go with Yogi not making shots and still maintain their confidence and their identity offensively. And you mentioned, he needs to get in the gym. Is it possible that he's buckling a bit under the pressure of playing so many minutes, and maybe he just needs to get off his feet for a couple of days and rest? Like, I know we don't know, but is there anything that you're seeing to suggest why he's missing these shots?
Well, that could be it. I mean, he could just need a break, but at the same time, I think that whenever a shooter is off, they need to get in the gym and get up shots and make sure it's coming off their hand the right way, make sure they're breaking the wrist the right way, make sure they're holding the ball the right way, and getting the right lift on their, from their jump and everything. There's a whole bunch of technical things you can do to work on stuff, and we saw Nick Zeisloff go through it a few weeks ago. He was really struggling, and he seems to be sort of back to who he was now. But I think that with him, I don't know if it's the minutes. I don't know what it is. Whatever it is, he's got to figure it out. I mean, it's not on us to figure it out. It's on him to figure it out. Maybe he needs to take a day off, and then maybe he needs to hit the gym really hard the next day. But, you're just seeing a guy who, on his jump shots, it's almost like he's thinking he wants to do something else, and then he's like, I'll just shoot. It's not like okay, I'm going to go here, right there. I'm going to pull up and I'm going to shoot. It's not. It doesn't look like it's planned. And occasionally, we saw this against Iowa. There was a reversal, and he got the ball to Zeisloff, and Zeisloff pump faked and dribbled back like he was going to take a 3, and then his guy kind of recovered, and so he just gave it to Yogi, and Yogi caught it like sort of in his waist and then shot a 3. He was clearly watching Zeisloff, not prepared to shoot. Got to be prepared to shoot when you get the ball, especially if you're a guy like Yogi who shoots it so well. So I think that part of it is he doesn't really know when he gets the ball. He feels the pressure to do something, especially when IU is struggling offensively like they did against Penn State and like they did today. And so he feels like he has to do something, but he doesn't know what to do. So he'll get into the lane and he'll just kind of stop and pull up, or he's not getting to the basket, and so he'll try and force something. I mean, it's a litany of things that are all adding up to him really struggling. So I think that he needs to, watch some film, figure out what's going on. He needs to sit with Crean, figure out the right offensive sets to run, things like that, and just sort it out, because Indiana cannot perform down the stretch with him playing this way.
Speaking of guys who can't perform this way down the stretch and Indiana succeed, is Troy Williams. And sometimes you can see a rough outing coming from a mile away. And, look, I'm always going to try and be optimistic and hopeful. And I was really hopeful that the way that Troy played in the second half after he got benched against Iowa would carry into today, because I thought he really responded well and played some of his best basketball against Iowa over the final 13, 14 minutes of the second half. But, this has always been a really, really tough matchup for Troy. If you look at his 4 games against Michigan State coming into today, he was averaging 4.3 points, 1.5 assists, 3.5 boards, and was shooting 31.5, or his effective field goal percentage was 31.5%. And you look at what he did today, and it was basically that. He didn't score. He had 4 rebounds, and he had a couple really nice offensive rebounds in the second half, an assist, a couple turnovers, and he was 0-5 from the field. And 3 of those attempts were 3-pointers. One was at the end of the shot clock and he was wide open, okay, but the other 2, he really had no business taking. And I just wonder, in a game like this, in a matchup that is just so not good for Troy, and when he's not, when he's just not getting anything going, at what point, if you're Tom Crean, do you just sit him down for an even more extended period? I mean, he only played 20 minutes, so it's not like he was out there playing starter minutes, but it still felt like he was out there too much, not giving you anything. And that can't be a surprise, because especially in Michigan State, Troy as a freshman scored 9 points there. In his last 80 minutes at the Breslin Center, he has 0 points. I mean, what do you do? I mean, I know you want to get him going, and yet at what point do you just say this isn't going to happen right now, and we've got to have 5 guys out there who give us a chance to compete?
Well, I think that he's such a wild card, because like we've talked about with him, he can play terribly, for long stretches of time. But then he'll get that against Iowa. He had that weak side tip in that nobody else on the floor could have possibly had. And so I think it's almost like when you're struggling, they put him out there because maybe he can make something happen on the off chance he makes something happen. But again, somebody needs to sit Troy down and tell him he's not a three-point shooter, because he's not. I mean, occasionally off a reversal once a game to shoot a three, or like you said, late in the shot clock when there's no other option, fine. But he's like hunting for 3-point shots. You can see it. And that's just lazy offense, because we can get Troy Williams shooting a three anytime we want, because other teams will say, yes, please shoot that. But you didn't see Troy running the baseline today. You didn't see him back cutting. You didn't see any of that stuff. And part of it is Michigan State takes that stuff away. They're good enough to take that stuff away. They're smart enough to not let him do that. But at the same time, you still run you still cut back door because it opens things up for the offense. And you still do things like that. But yeah, I agree. It was just a terrible outing. He only played 20 minutes, as you said. It wasn't like, this game is on Troy. But I just thought he offered nothing when he was in there. And again, he's a guy who just at some point, he's either going to get it or he's not. And he's got to play to his strengths. And you know what? At this point, you just keep feeling like he's not going to get it and not going to, take the step back and slow himself down and not press and not push and not just try and run wild every time he has the ball. He needs to work on his ball handling, first of all, and because he's too loose with it. I mean, even there were times where he could have had a turnover twice today, where he tried to dribble and cut and go back door, and he lost the ball, but it wound up bouncing to a teammate, or he ended up recovering it. But that, that one-on-one crap completely throws the offense off. And so he just has to, I mean, like I said, he's either going to get it or he's not. And it's going to happen within the next few weeks. If it doesn't happen, it's never going to happen. And he needs to slow down and just understand that he doesn't need to do too much to make stuff work. I mean, against Iowa, I thought he did a great job settling down in that second half, as you said.
So I do want to talk about the defense, but that's going to be pretty depressing. So before we get there, let's think a happy thought real quick, and let's talk about Max Bielfeldt, who I thought was really good today, all things considered. I thought in the first half he stepped up. He led Indiana in scoring in the first half, led him in the game with 15 points. He had 10 boards, 4 offensive rebounds. He started today. Obviously, Tom Crean wanted to play the matchups a little bit, and he wanted Bryant starting next to Bielfeldt, so Hartman came in off the bench. And I thought there were several points, especially in the first half, where Indiana needed a bucket. The offense got a little bit stagnant, and he stepped up and made it, whether it was a drive inside, whether it was stepping out and knocking down a three. He was 3 of 5 from downtown. Now in the second half, like everybody else, his efficiency dipped, and he wasn't able to do much scoring inside. But, again, on a day without many positives, I thought the way that Max played, the old Michigan guy still hating on Michigan State, playing well in the Breslin Center. I thought he was one bright spot for Indiana today.
Yeah, I thought he played very well. The second half, everything he had was contested. So, I mean, like with everybody else, as we said. And so it wasn't as easy. But I thought the first half, he really helped pace the offense. I thought he was great on the boards. I think that he played well all around. I mean, 6 of 14 from the field, but then, in the second half, everything at the rim was contested. So, you kind of forgive him for that. 3 of 5 from 3. I kind of wish he hadn't taken those 2 other threes. I didn't think either one was a very good shot, but the 3 he made, hey, you keep making them. I can't hate on you for it. So, but yeah, no, 4 offensive boards was huge. And there were a couple times late where I thought he got fouled trying to go up, but in a blowout, you're not going to get those calls. Late, I mean, like with about 10 minutes left, because quite frankly, with 15 minutes left, this game was over. So I think that, he was working down low, even if he wasn't making his shots, he was working and still trying to get something to happen. So it was a great day for Max. Unfortunately, very few other people stepped up and filled in around him. But yeah, I thought he played very well, and he just continues to be, better than everybody said he would be, and a huge part of this team.
One thing I always find myself thinking whenever we play Michigan State is that it really seems like they know how to make it difficult on the opposition. They make the opposition uncomfortable, which you've talked about multiple times today. They made Indiana uncomfortable, especially in the second half. And it always seems to be in stark contrast to how we defend them. And I think at times this year, our defense has been very good and we've made teams uncomfortable. I thought we made Iowa uncomfortable in the second part of the second half. But today, from about the 10-minute moment on in the first half all the way through the rest of the game, I thought Michigan State was extremely comfortable. I thought in transition, we weren't good at all at locating shooters and communicating. And that actually goes back to the Iowa game because I didn't think we did it great there. And Tom Crean has mentioned on his pregame show both times how big of a key that was. And I thought just, defending screens, especially against Valentine and Forbes, were going under the screen and giving them wide open shots. And I know that Tom didn't want to leave shooters and really talked in the pregame about not overhelping. But there were several times that you had Denzel Valentine driving down the lane and guys are backing up because they're afraid of the dump-off pass. And yet he's just able to continue to go into the lane and get layups. And I realize you have to kind of pick your poison. And maybe the strategy is, make Valentine beat you, shooting those shots. But at some point you have to make them 10 or 12-foot jumpers, not layups right at the rim. And it just, it seemed like Indiana really had something good going offensively. Michigan State adjusted and we never adjusted back. And defensively, it just looked like they finally got in their rhythm and we didn't try anything different. We didn't maybe try a zone to see if that could slow it up. We didn't try and pick up full court. A couple times we tried to go, a little box and not even a box and one, but just have a guy chase Valentine and try and deny him the ball. But it didn't really seem to do anything. I mean, do you look at this, what could Indiana have done? Or more importantly, what should they have done to try and slow this down or stem the tide? Because it just, as I mentioned earlier, Michigan State scored between either 9 or 10 points between every TV timeout in the second half. And it just didn't look like we changed anything to do anything.
There's a word for Michigan State, and it's methodical. And it's just, that is the word that just absolutely sums up this team. They just work you to death. And the one problem isn't the guy who makes it all go. And the reason why he's a National Player of the Year candidate is Denzel Valentine. He's a 6'5", 220-pound point guard, essentially. I mean, he's built like a college small forward, and he plays point guard. He's quick enough to beat bigger guys that'll try and guard him, and he's big enough where he can shoot over guards. And it's such a tough matchup. And you saw Robert Johnson was on him a lot, and I thought Robert did his best. I mean, but Valentine he's a National Player of the Year candidate for a reason. He is just very good, and getting beaten up by him is not something to be embarrassed about. But you saw, Yogi Ferrell had no chance on him. He's just too small compared. Valentine is 6 inches and probably 30 pounds, 40 pounds on him. I mean, and so he would go immediately, and Valentine is so smart that immediately he'd see Ferrell had him, he'd go right to the block and make something happen there. You saw when Robert Johnson was on him, they just did a lot of ball screens. And Johnson, I mean, honestly, you go over the screen. They tried going over the screen a few times, and Valentine would just get right into the lane and dish it to somebody else when their help came. I mean, he's such a smart player that he just exploited everything they did. The pick and roll stuff that he was running, I mean, just abused him. You saw OG Anunoby got on him a little bit and harassed him, made him feel uncomfortable. But again, OG's a freshman. It was like when he was guarding Utah the other night. He's a freshman facing a senior who is going to be, who's going to be in the discussion for National Player of the Year.
And OG also got lost himself some on defense too. I mean, I thought he had some good possessions on Denzel, but he also got lost a little bit, especially in transition.
Of course. Yeah, no, and that's the thing is he's a freshman. That's going to happen. You're going to screw up. That's part of being a freshman. You're going to screw up, and you learn from it, and you get better. The best thing about freshmen is they become sophomores. That old quote is absolutely 100% true. But, he tried. I mean, it wasn't an effort thing. He was just getting beaten because he's facing a better player. And so it all starts with Valentine, and their offense is just, when it's humming like that and when he's playing as well as he played, I mean, I don't care what you do. Like we could say Indiana's defense was weak. It was weak. But if that guy's going to score 30 points and dish out 13 assists, you're going to lose the game. Like there's nothing you can do there. I mean, he's just that good. And then when Matt Costello, even against contested shots, was 10 of 12 from the field, I mean, it's not like they weren't guarding him. A couple times Costello had clean looks off of, guys helping to guard Valentine, and he got easy dunks or layups. But, I mean, half of those were, over-the-shoulder shots against Bielfeldt and Bryant where they were in, decent defensive position. And then he stepped out and hit a three, which, I mean, Matt Costello hitting a three, that was just an insult to injury for Indiana. But no, I just think when Michigan State's humming like that, I mean, yeah, Indiana should have played better on ball defense. They shouldn't have been overhelping as much as they were. They should have closed out the shooters better. But again, you can still do all that and lose this game because of how well Michigan State was playing. So I think it's one of those things where they need to go back, watch the second half film. The first half film, I mean, Michigan State wasn't playing that well and still was up one at the break. But you need to watch that second half film, watch where they got lost and things like that, and also understand that when a team plays that well, you're not going to win the game. It's just not going to happen, and they need to understand where they can, what possessions could we have done a better job on and maybe made it so they didn't score that bucket and maybe made it so they didn't score the next bucket and then the next one and then the next one. And you start looking at it individually as possessions, not the game as a whole. Because the game as a whole is going to be a tough watch because you just couldn't stop Valentine today. There was no way they were going to stop him.
Yeah. And also, again, we mentioned some of those numbers earlier, the job on the glass, Indiana, again, getting 34.8% of their offensive rebounds and doing a decent job on the defensive glass. Michigan State only rebounded 28% of their misses. It was a really nice rebounding effort from Indiana. They did a good job with turnovers. So there were some things they did well. And if you get a vintage shooting game from Indiana, this is a much more competitive game. But again, part of the reason why was, kind of the lack of activity in the second half, Michigan State making it tough, all of those reasons. So, I think you're right, Ryan. And hopefully the team does that because, the reality check here is Indiana still sits at 10-3. This is clearly a disappointing game. And if history serves, this Indiana team is not going to win the Big Ten title because, again, out of the last 25 games at the Breslin Center since '87, the 4 games Indiana has won have all been by Big Ten title teams. And so I was kind of excited that we'd go in there, we'd get this win. And now you're thinking, okay, this might be a Big Ten championship team. But when you see what Indiana has left, what Iowa has left on their schedule, it's clearly going to be very hard to win a regular season Big Ten title. But that doesn't mean that everything is, that all the goals for the season are gone now. This Indiana team is still, with the Iowa win and with some of the things that they've done, have put themselves still in a good position heading down the stretch. You just can't let a loss like this snowball.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's key to note that while it is a tough stretch down the stretch for Indiana, they still control their own destiny to win the Big Ten title. Mm-hmm. I mean, they still control their own destiny. They still have a matchup with Iowa. They still have Maryland, and right now, and I think Andy tweeted it out. Somebody did. I think it was Andy. They've got a 3-game stretch of Nebraska and Purdue at home, and then at Illinois. They got to win all 3 of those games if they want to compete for the Big Ten title. Yep. But figure it like this: you beat Nebraska, okay? That gives you 11 conference wins. Even if you lose to Purdue, who is a tough matchup for Indiana, that is a very tough matchup for Indiana, given what Purdue can do. But it's at Assembly Hall. It's going to be a live atmosphere. Iowa was a tough matchup for Indiana too, and the crowd and everything helped them rise above it. It's gonna be one of the bigger IU Purdue games in years. So let's give them a loss there. If you go at Illinois and win, that's 12 wins in the conference. No matter what, that's a successful season. No matter what, that's a successful Big Ten conference season.
Yeah, and I'm also not willing to agree with your give them a loss to Purdue. So
well, no, I'm not saying. I'm saying let's say worst case scenario they lose the game. That gives them 12 conference wins. And then again, you've got 3 games, Purdue, Iowa, and Maryland. To get 1 or 2 wins, you could be at 13 wins in the conference if you pull off one of those wins. I think, that's still a very good season. So that's why I'm not so doom and gloom about this loss. I mean, it's a bad loss. It sucked to take. They got outplayed. They got run out of the gym, all that stuff. But there's still a lot of opportunity left in this season to take a 13-win Big Ten season, which is unbelievable. I mean, especially considering, all the offseason turmoil, things like that, this and the way the season started, in Maui and then against Duke, to win 13 games in the Big Ten is something that nobody thought was possible. Right now, they're not there yet. They got 10, but look, beat Nebraska, which is Nebraska always plays tough, but it's a team they should beat. Roll the dice against Purdue, see what happens. At home, live atmosphere. I mean, anything could happen in that game. Then you go at Illinois, who is a very beatable team. there's still a lot there for Indiana this year. I don't think it's, people are going to say like, wow, well, they needed to pick up a tough road win somewhere in there, and they didn't do it today, and blah, blah, blah. And people are going to start getting down on. There's still a wide open chance for Indiana to do something with this season. Could surprise everybody and win the Big Ten title. It's still there for the taking. So this team needs to be bummed about this loss, needs to, watch the film, get it right, and realize they still have everything to play for. It's all on the table for Indiana still right now.
A dose of reality from Ryan Phillips. I like it. I love the optimism, man. It's beautiful. So I've got a stat on Yogi Ferrell that is pretty telling. We will get to that in a second. Ryan, get your sweatshirt ready real quick here because I want to show fans, the folks who are watching live, the sweatshirt. So you can see Ryan's sweatshirt. Here, say something so you come up on the screen. Well, you got to unmute yourself to say something.
I just don't like talking that much, Jared. I like being quiet. So the Assembly Call sweatshirt right here.
So you see the sweatshirt right there. You see the Assembly Call, the official Assembly Call coasters right here, made out of limestone with the Assembly Call logo on it. One great way to support the show, and many people have been taking us up on this, is actually buy this gear with the logo on it. You can go to assemblycall.com/gear. You can get the coasters, and 25% of the proceeds from the coasters goes to support the show. You can get the sweatshirt. 20% of the proceeds from the sweatshirt goes to support the show. And it's a great way to support the show, to get some cool gear, and we certainly appreciate it. We didn't have the sweatshirt as recently as the last game, but by popular demand, at least 4 people sent me emails or tweets asking me about Ryan's sweatshirt, and so we got that up on the site. You can check that out. We really appreciate all of your support. What are you gonna say?
It's extremely comfortable too. I love this thing. So
yeah, it is, and the ladies love it. It makes you smarter. I mean, it's
soft. It's soft. They all want to borrow it, guys. Don't let them, but they all want to.
All right. There's a lot of benefits to this. So anyway, go to assemblycall.com/gear. If you like either of those items, there's a link there that you can purchase them. We'd greatly appreciate it. And if there's anything specific that you'd like us to put up there, any specific type of gear, just send me a tweet, send me an email, and we will be happy to get it up there. All right, everybody, you are listening to the Assembly Call. I am Jared Morris. I'm here with Ryan Phillips. We are breaking down Indiana's 88-69 loss to Michigan State today. And I thought Ryan did a great job of, being realistic about this loss. It was terrible, but also, we've got to maintain perspective that the sky is not falling. This was very disappointing, but Indiana still has all of its goals out there in front of it. Now, for Indiana to do anything about that and for this season to not take a turn for the worse, as many others have done in previous Februaries and previous Marches, Yogi Ferrell is going to have to lead this team. And look, through the first 8 Big Ten games, this is the stat that I mentioned before, and this comes via Justin Albers on Twitter. In Indiana's first 8 Big Ten games, Yogi averaged 20.3 points per game. He shot 54.4% from the field, and he was 55.6% from three-point range. He was scorching. Over the last 5 games, Yogi's averaging 13 points per game. He's only shooting 30.2% from the field, and his three-point percentage is down to 27.6%. So, look, Yogi has enough of a track record. He's been such a good shooter, especially over the last 2 years and through the first part of this season, that I'm not sitting here worried about it. I'm still, every time he shoots it, I'm expecting it to go in, and I'm fairly confident that he's going to have a big run coming where he shoots really well and scores really well. But it is getting a little bit concerning. And so I think that is one of the biggest things for Indiana that needs to turn around, that needs to get a little bit better. I mean, as you look forward, Ryan, with some of these games, you talk about this 3-game stretch at home against Nebraska, then against Purdue, at Illinois. Outside of Yogi shooting better, what do you think are the 1 or 2 keys for Indiana, winning at least two out of these 3 games, if not all of them? Who's the one guy, or what's the one thing that needs to happen for that to happen?
I think against Nebraska specifically, they need to isolate Thomas Bryant on the inside. I don't think Nebraska has the size to deal with him. I think they need to just pound the ball to him and let the offense work off of that. I thought they did a good effort. They made a good effort trying to go inside early today, and then in the second half, as things got ragged, it kind of went out the window. And that's that again, in a blowout where you're not playing well, that kind of stuff happens. You go away from what's working. It's not like they're sitting on the sideline saying, okay, well, let's not throw it inside. It just, in the flow of a blowout like that, where you're not playing well, everything kind of goes out the window. No matter what you're consciously trying to do, you just don't. You don't play well. I think Nebraska is a game where they need to just attack with Bryant on the inside. I think Purdue, I think it's the same thing. To beat Purdue, they've got to get Hammonds in foul trouble. They've got to, exploit that matchup down low. Let Thomas Bryant, pump him up all week. Say, look, man, this is you going against, one of the top players in the country defensively. Just go get him. And also they gotta be more selective on their 3-point shots. I think that in the last couple of games they've just kind of been jacking. They haven't really been taking the right shot and they haven't been focusing the offense on getting better looks. They've just been firing from the perimeter. And but I think that it's on everybody. I don't think there's one specific guy that needs to step up, but I think they need to exploit Thomas Bryant against Nebraska for sure. And then I think that, Yogi's got to step up. I mean, look, especially against Purdue, that's going to be a game where Yogi needs to play really well.
That was professional broadcasting right there, not bursting out into laughter when it's only two of us hosting the show. Yeah, I agree with you about that, especially. Let me ask you this. I thought it was interesting today that Coach Crean shifted up the starting lineup. And, I've never really thought that you have to have the same starting lineup every single game, and Crean has talked about how, it's not like there's 5 starters. We really have 7 starters or 8 starters, and he's kind of paid lip service to that. And yet you would think that if he actually believed that, then every now and then the actual starting lineup would change based on matchups. And today it did, because Max started over Colin, presumably for matchup purposes. And, I'm wondering what you think about that. I mean, Coach Knight used to do that. I mean, he would switch up the lineups, whether it's for disciplinary reasons, for matchup reasons, that would happen. And I think there's that reason to do it. And also with the lineup, again, at what point is Troy Williams not a starter? And do you not let him go out there at the beginning just kind of hoping that you get something good from him instead of kind of making him earn it with good play coming in off the bench? Because I think, to me, you want your starters to be consistent players that you kind of know what you're going to get, know what you can count on. And while Troy, I thought, grew a lot between his freshman and sophomore year, that jump we all expected hasn't happened. And I just wonder if he's earned the right to keep that starting slot, or if that's one that should be open, especially if Green is going to think about changing it up based on matchups.
Yeah, I don't know. As far as today, I thought it was the right move because they've got, Michigan State has size down low with Devontae Davis and Matt Costello. You've got 2 guys that are over 6'10". So it really helped. Instead of having Hartman, who was 6'6", guarding Davis, you had Bielfeldt, and Bielfeldt could also pull Davis out onto the floor with his shooting ability on offense. So, yeah, I thought it was the right move today. Now, do you go to that constantly? I think it does depend on matchups. I think against Nebraska, you're going to face a smaller, faster team, and I think that Max could be out of place there at the 4, and maybe you put Colin Hartman back in. As for long term, I mean, I think against Purdue, you're going to see the size lineup again, and I would not be opposed to seeing Colin Hartman in the starting lineup instead of Troy in that case. But with Troy, it's one of those things where when he plays a great game, it changes the game, and maybe you try and catch lightning in the bottle off the tip, and if it doesn't work, you throw him on the bench again. But, it's one of those things where it's just so hard to predict what's going to happen with him and how he's going to play. And when he does play well, like down the stretch against Iowa, he's a game changer for IU. The problem is it doesn't happen consistently enough. So, it's such a hard thing to say, like, oh, well, this guy, he shouldn't be starting. This guy should be playing this, because with Troy, it's such a roll of the dice. You never know what you're going to get.
Yeah. Someone in the chat just mentioned that I'm going to get hate mail from Troy's mom. And, look, if I get hate mail about Troy, then they're going after the wrong person, because I think I've defended Troy a lot, and a lot for the reasons that you talked about, Ryan, like that incredible rebound tipping he had against Iowa. He can do things other players can't do. And every now and then he flashes it. The problem is he does a lot of things that other guys don't do in terms of the wild drives and the turnovers and just kind of the momentum killing plays that it in many ways offset the momentum building plays that he has. And all I want is for Troy to find a role that he's comfortable in. I felt like he was growing into it last year, and then for whatever reason this year, it's like he's just felt out of place. It's felt like he's kind of forcing things when they're not there. He's not comfortable. He's trying to do too much, never in the flow. I don't get it. And I had higher hopes for him this year. I know we all did. And at some point, it becomes a detriment to what the entire team is doing. And I thought on a day like today, Indiana was not better when Troy was on the floor. And when Troy plays at his best, when he plays up to his potential, Indiana is better with him out there because of all those things he can do. But we're getting into mid-February, and this isn't some kind of lost season. I mean, this has been a good season so far for Indiana, where the Hoosiers are, what are we now, 20-6? Let me get our record. We're 20-6 overall. This is a team that's in the top 25 in Ken Palm. You're coming off a big win against Iowa. You struggled today, but like Ryan said, you're looking at quite possibly a 12-13 win season in the conference. And if you get there, you're going to have a decent seed in the tournament. So a lot of what you were going for is there, but now it's the time to double down on what's working and start to eliminate the stuff that isn't. And that's why we keep coming up on this topic, especially these last few games about, should Troy be starting? Does he need to be playing as many minutes? And it's just at some point, a guy is capable of so much, but you do him a disservice by not holding him accountable to what he's capable of. And look, I think
let me step in here real quick. None of us dislike Troy. Yeah. I think that's the percent. It's that we expect a lot from him because of how immensely talented he is. I mean, Dick Vitale, was screaming about that the game the other night, that, he's so talented. He could be so good. And I don't think he knows how good he can be. And I don't think Troy knows how good he can be. There's just this, there's a disconnect between his ability and what we see on the floor. And obviously we're hard on him, and we're hard on him because we expect so much from him. His athletic ability is unbelievable. He has been given a gift, and he's worked at that gift. Let's not, he's worked at it. The problem is mentally he needs to approach the game in a different way and settle down and use his talents to the best of his ability, as opposed to just being the athletic guy. He's got to take his ability to the next level mentally. And that's all. And we expect more from him because of who we've seen in the past. He is all-American ability, and he needs to develop into that guy. And it's like, when we're frustrated, it's not just we're frustrated because Indiana lost and he didn't play well. We're frustrated for him that he's not reaching his potential. And it's nothing against him personally. It's just, as a basketball player, we feel he could be better. So I don't want people to misunderstand this, that we're like, oh, get Troy off the team, get him on the bench, blah, blah, blah. It's not that. We want Troy to be playing, and we want him to be playing really well, and we want him to reach his ability. And we all know that he's capable of being that all-American, unbelievable, just incredible player. He's just got to get there. And I don't know what it's going to take for that to happen, but it's one of those things where it's like we just all want to see him get there and be the elite player we all know he can be.
And it's, look, that part of being a college basketball fan and analyzing a college basketball team is that, the grading gets a little bit tougher when you become an upperclassman, when you become a junior. We're pretty easy on OG as a freshman right now because he's a freshman, and you celebrate the big plays while kind of excusing the bad ones. That won't be quite the same next year. In fact, that really starts changing about now. And especially when he becomes a junior, he'll have to be cleaning up some of these bad decisions. Well, it's the same thing that Troy is going through. And frankly, Yogi went through that same thing last year, and some at the end of his sophomore year, especially here on the assembly call. And then with a guy like Yogi, where he consistently performs so well, he gets a level of trust where now you start, when he has a bad, some bad shooting like this, we're not saying you bench Yogi, because he's earned that trust through his play. And I think that's the thing that Troy hasn't gotten to yet as an upperclassman that a lot of guys do, where they become more consistent. You can start to trust them. And that's the thing, is Troy just hasn't earned that level of trust yet. And it makes him such a wild card that it's got to be hard for Tom Crean as he's game planning and kind of figuring out what to do. Which Troy is it going to be? And I don't even mean game planning. I mean from, segment to segment within the game. And so, you just wonder, how what will happen with that down the stretch, because the consistency part hasn't seemed to smooth itself out here, in Big Ten play. And, again, we're getting to that point in the season where you can't keep having this many question marks. You've got to go with the guys that you know what you're going to get. Troy can still be that guy, but he's got to get there. There just aren't any more excuses. All right, we don't have Andy here to give us his patented breakdown of IU's upcoming opponent, which is Nebraska. I can tell you this about the Cornhuskers. They are currently 89th in KenPom. They are 14-12 overall. They are coming off a nice win against Penn State. It was a home win. They won 70-54, which is a really nice win for them. It's only their second win in the last 6 games. The other win was a home game against Rutgers. During that span, they have lost at home to Michigan. They've lost at Purdue. Both of those games were double-digit defeats. They've lost at home to Maryland by 5, and they've lost at Wisconsin by 11. So clearly 4 of the top teams in the Big Ten there. They've lost to. They've beaten up on a couple of bottom feeders. And in that game, Siobhan Shields did not play in that game for Nebraska. He is still recovering from an injury. I don't know what his status will be for the Indiana game. I think I remember reading something this morning that he might be back for that. Obviously, Andrew White is the guy that you've got to pay attention to. He had 35 points in that Penn State game. He has an offensive rating of 124.2, which is similar to what Yogi's is. So he's a guy that you've really got to guard, a good 3-point shooter. He'll be the big matchup for Indiana. But if you remember back, Indiana beat Nebraska by 10 at Nebraska earlier this season in what was a pretty good performance from the Hoosiers. Yogi played very well in that game. He had 24 points, shot well. He was 4 of 5 from downtown. So maybe, the comfort of facing an opponent that he's done well against already this year will be helpful. He also had 7 assists. And Thomas Bryant was outstanding. He had 19 points. He was 8 of 10 from the field, did pick up 4 rebounds. And really, those were the 2 headliners. OG came off the bench. If you remember, that was kind of one of OG's coming out parties when he had 11 points. He was perfect from the field, 4 for 4, including a 3. And then you had several other guys who contributed some decent numbers. Troy in that game, for what it's worth, did have 8 points, was 4 of 7 from the field, and had 5 rebounds. So it's a game with Nebraska coming into Assembly Hall that you certainly feel comfortable with. You feel confident. Indiana hasn't lost a game there. And I was listening to actually the CBS Eye on College Basketball podcast, and Gary Parrish made an important point, about Indiana winning against Iowa. Indiana would be favored right now against any team in the country in Assembly Hall. That's the kind of home court advantage, and that's the kind of parity that there is in college basketball. And so I think, if you're Indiana, you've got to guard against a letdown, an emotional letdown after this Michigan State loss. Having your confidence shot a little bit. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully being back at home, good energy from the crowd, Indiana can get back going. It's a game Indiana should win. Certainly, I think it's a game that we'll predict them to win. Ryan, you want to add something real quick?
Yeah, I just think that one thing that you've got to remember about Nebraska and Tim Miles, he's a weird dude, but he's actually a pretty decent coach. And one thing he does is those guys defend really hard on the perimeter. They're aggressive perimeter defenders. And I think that that's going to open up, as I said before, that's going to open up things inside for Thomas Bryant, as it did in the first matchup. And you work inside out against them because that's how you're going to get your open looks. They're an extremely, as I said, aggressive defensive team on the perimeter. And that's to their credit. They make it uncomfortable for you to run sets on the perimeter. So the key for Indiana is going to be getting inside the 3-point line, getting to the hoop, and making stuff happen there.
Yeah, and to illustrate your point, Nebraska is top 100 in the country at forcing turnovers. They forced turnovers on 19.6% of their opponents' possessions. And in that first game, Indiana turned it over on 19.7% of their possessions. It's one of the games where Indiana was able to go on the road and win despite a turnover rate that was a little bit higher than you would want. Of course, that 19.7 is actually lower than their season rate. But yeah, this Nebraska team will get out. They'll defend hard. So Indiana's got to get Thomas Bryant involved, as they did in that first game, to get that victory, which they so desperately need coming off this loss and with a lot of tough games still to go. Well, real quick, before we close up here, we've got last call and our picks coming up. One final reminder to get on the email list. It's assemblycall.com/subscribe, or you can text Indiana, INDIANA, to 44144. Again, you will get our post-game emails. Those are sent out 6:30 Central Time the morning after every IU game. They include my analysis, Andy's analysis, Will's stat of the game, plus some other goodies, some links that you can go to for more coverage on the most recent game. It's something we only send to subscribers, so we hope you'll get on there. There are over 1,600 IU fans on the list right now. We're just waiting for you to join us, so get on that email list. All right, well, it is time to shut down this episode of the Assembly Call. Not a particularly happy, jubilant, or joyful one as the Hoosiers lose 88-69. It was a game the Hoosiers were only down 1 at halftime, but Michigan State, to use Ryan's term, just methodically dominated Indiana in the second half, demoralized Indiana, and really just kind of crushed them into submission there for the 19-point win. Real quick, I don't think it's really a question, but just to make it official, I think Andy already went on record saying that Indiana would win. I'm sure Will's going to pick the Hoosiers. Ryan, are you going to go on record right now saying Indiana will beat Huskers?
Yeah, I think Indiana is going to win by about 20. I think that it'll be closer. It'll be kind of uncomfortable for a bit, but I think that Indiana is going to pull it out and win that one and head into Purdue riding pretty high after this one. Get back on the mountain with a win and head into that Purdue game.
Yep, I agree. I think this is a game that Indiana is going to win. I don't think we need to dive into it too much, being at home in Assembly Hall. If they don't come away with a win, it would be an absolute disaster, and then you can start to panic if Indiana loses that game to Nebraska. But I think it's a game that we can all have confidence in. Yeah, someone asked in the chat, where does Andy have Indiana seated? It's going to be really interesting to see after this week what happens with Indiana's projected seeds, because, the Hoosiers were kind of in that 8-9 range, I think, before this week, people wondering who they've played. Well, now Indiana's beaten a top 5 team in Iowa, but gone on the road and lost to a top 10 team in Michigan State pretty badly. So that'll be kind of interesting. I would, I don't know, because, the Iowa win was at home, so some bracketologists kind of discount that, and yet a big loss on the road. Some people, they won't look at that too harshly because of who it was against, where it was played. So it'll be interesting to see if Indiana's up on the 7 line. Do they stay at the 8-9? Make sure that you check out our site on Tuesday. That's when Andy always posts his latest bracketology. You can get that at assemblycall.com/bracketology. Follow us on Twitter. We'll probably send an email about it. Andy's the best in the business at projecting this stuff, so I will wait to see what he has, and we'll see. Hopefully it's ticked up a little bit. Either way, Indiana still has plenty of games on its schedule to impress the committee and hopefully move up into that 5-6 range or get even higher, onto the 4 line, and there are obvious advantages to doing that. So we'll see what Andy says on Tuesday, and we'll see what the Hoosiers have in store for us for the rest of the season. It's all just speculation right now. With that said, Ryan, let's close this up. Last call.
Yeah, I just think, again, people shouldn't get too down about this loss. I think it was, Indiana didn't play particularly well, but they ran into an absolute juggernaut that played like a juggernaut today. And, that Michigan State team it looks really good right now and looks like a team that could make a deep run. Shocking that a Tom Izzo team could make a deep run into the NCAA tournament. But right now, I would probably, after today, I'd pick Michigan State to win against whoever they were playing. Maybe Kansas is a team that I wouldn't that I would think about before picking Michigan State, but right now that looks like the best team in the country, quite frankly. And I know they're coming off a loss against Purdue, but man, the way they played today, I don't think anybody's beating them right now.